What is happening, guys? Welcome back to Redbeard's Garage and welcome to the Road to Horsepower. Now, the Road to Horsepower is, of course, a series where we started off with a stock Predator 212cc engine from Harbor Freight. We started with the Hemi engine, and we start adding part by part and dynoing it after every single part. And this was going to tell us the real-world horsepower of what these parts are actually doing on our go-karts and mini bikes. So we last left off making over 16 horsepower. We're at about 16.5 horsepower, and we haven't really got into crazy performance parts yet. We're just doing a lot of bolt-on parts. In the last video, we did port up the head, and that made a huge difference, jumping up in 2 horsepower. Well, now we can take advantage of those ports flowing more air with a more lift cam. So what we have is a 308 cam from Go Power Sports. This is one of probably the most popular cams for these small engines. They make a ton of power. They got a high RPM band, and it's going to be an excellent choice to get the most horsepower out of this engine. Now, we will be going to a 356 cam and stuff like that in the future, but for now we're going to do it in piece by piece. So we're going to jump up to the 308 next. Now, of course, to do this mod, we do have to go up to some dual valve springs. And on the Hemi engine, you do have to cut some spring reliefs in the head. So we did buy a spring cutting tool. This basically goes in your head and cuts out the pocket for the spring to set in. You can also use this tool to get your spring height right. The more you compress these springs, the more pressure they have on them. So you do have to worry about that. There are some breakdowns you can find on at what spring height the springs actually rate. And these are 40 dual springs. We do have all these parts linked in the video's description, so you can check that out. So without further ado, we got to take this engine, we got to pull the side cover out, we got to slap in that 308 cam. We probably are going to have to do some more clearancing in this engine. The Hemi engines are known to have to do clearancing when doing high lift cams, so we'll probably have to get into that. We're also going to be pulling the head. We're basically almost stripping this engine down completely, because if we have to do clearance, then we're going to have to pull the flywheel and everything. So it's a pretty extensive job putting a higher lift cam in it, but we'll go over everything and show you guys what we're doing, and then we're going to see what kind of power it makes on the dyno. Since this engine really didn't have any time on it, just what we ran on the dyno, this cam is still in like new shape. You can see the lobes look perfectly fine. So we'll tag this, put it in a box for later use in another project, because we know that 308 cam is going to make more horsepower than this 265. It's just a fact that 90% of the time lift makes more power. This one already has been pre-clearanced, of course, from where we had to clearance it for the billet rod. So we'll be good to go to slap this in another Hemi down the road. We have our cut up side cover here. We don't necessarily have to torque this down because as long as it's on there, we're going to see the same amount of clearance in this engine. Now I'm basically going to slide on this old CVT pulley, and we can spin this engine around, make sure we don't have any clearance issues. Oh yeah, we have plenty of clearance. So we're good to run our 308 cam. We have already clearanced the crankshaft in this engine, so that's why we're not going to have to do any extra clearancing. Normally on a Hemi engine, if you take the lobes beside of the journal of your rod, the little ears that's on that crankshaft off, normally that's the main issues with clearance, but we don't have any clearance issues. You can push the cam to one side, rotate it, push it all the way to the other side. We don't have any clearance issues, so now we can just clean up this block. You can see inside This is why I highly recommend running one of our magnetic dipsticks, is this is like pure just block aware. It don't matter how you build these engines, you'll always get this, and it's pretty nasty inside of here. Normally you'll get this real bad between the first handful of oil changes. That's pretty horrible, and we don't have any clearance issues. This is just normal wear of these blocks. I've never had one blow up from it. We've actually never blown up an engine. The only time we did was when we forgot to put oil in one, making some videos. But so now we can clean this back up, get the side cover put back on with that new 308 cam installed, and we can cut our new spring pockets. As you can see, our new dual valve springs does not fit in the spring pockets. We'll have to use this spring pocket tool to cut them out and get our proper spring height. This tool uses the valve guide to guide it and keep it straight. Here I'm using a drill to cut the extra material out to allow the dual valve springs to set flat in the head. But you will need to use a mill to properly cut the depth of the spring pocket. So I wanted to show this as an example of what not to use. So Go Power Sports sells two different type of billet retainers. These are what hold your valve springs in place. Now the billet retainers I had on this engine prior to these dual valve springs was the standard billet retainers. If you notice, these have a much more aggressive lip to them. And this is because these are made for dual valve springs. So right now I have this set in there that is actually for standard single valve springs, just your standard 18 or 26 pound valve springs, and I'm getting coil bind before my valve can open all the way up. So I'm going to show that on camera right now. You can see the inside valve spring is getting coil bind, but we still have plenty of space in the outer valve spring, and that's because we didn't use the right cap. I wanted to install this real quick to show this, to make sure to buy the proper parts. Just because you have billet retainers, it don't mean you have the correct ones. You got to buy the ones with the step down lip on it like this for dual valve springs. So now we'll pull this head back off real fast, put the right ones on, and we'll show you what it's supposed to look like. All right, so we actually took the head down to a local machine shop because my mill isn't running yet, and we had the spring pockets cut 100 thousandths deeper. So basically, once I took those, once I opened up the spring pockets to be able to fit the dual springs, the springs was getting coil bind way before we could get full lift. So on a non-Hemi head, sometimes you got to open them up about 50 thousandths. So we did 100 thousandths, because if we was already at spring at coil bind and we wasn't even at full lift, then we knew 50 thousand wasn't going to be enough, because you want around 40 to 50 thousandths gap in your springs at maximum lift. This is the only downside. This is why you always see me use non-Hemi heads. We've pre-ported this head, and basically this barb is here for a nitrous video that's coming up on the channel. Anyways, we pre-ported this head, but we didn't hog it out. You can see the material is pretty much still there. The biggest thing we did was cleaned up the transitions and the valve seat and stuff in the head. So this is the problem with a Hemi head. You can see that hole down here in the corner where it broke into the intake port. So that's the downside to a Hemi style head. Especially, I probably took a little bit of material out of that corner, not a ton though. Like I said, you can see the port shape is relatively the same. We just cleaned up the transitions in there. So now I'm going to actually just use some epoxy to shut that hole back up in the intake side and let it fully cure before running this, and then we can assemble it and make sure we have enough spring movement, like valve train movement, so we don't get coil bind. So again, that's why we use non-Hemi heads. You have a lot less problems. You can shave a non-Hemi head more because this is a hemispheric head. The valves are on an angle. A lot of companies also worry about these pedestals, being weak over like 8,000 RPMs. They've never necessarily seen one break, but it is a weak point that you do have to worry about, those rocker pedestals. So it's just there's good things with a Hemi head and bad things. Of course, they flow better head for head. You know, if you pull a stock one out of the box, they're going to flow a little bit better. But when we're talking about getting into real power, you can't mill these a lot. You know, it'd be nice to weld up the chamber and make it into like a 14cc head or something. But again, you can just start off with a non-Hemi head and get a lot more out of it in the long run. So we're going to clean up and fix that little hole where it punctured through. I'm just going to go in there, clean it with acetone, and then put a good chunk of, I'm probably going to rough it up with a Dremel bit and then put some epoxy over it and just make sure it's sealed up good. So just wanted everybody to know that. The tool worked great though. Tool is amazing. I just had the machine shop. They put it on an angle, lined it up with that tool, zeroed it out, and then went 100 thousandths deeper. So we'll get this cleaned out, we'll patch that hole, then we'll get it installed and see if we still got coil binding. So once we got the head all fully installed, after taking it to the machine shop, we had to actually pull it back off, run back down to the machine shop and take down the exhaust another 40 thousandths to get our gap in our spring. Now you can measure spring height. I don't think anybody makes a tool. On screen you can see a tool for like a LS engine that you can basically install it in the place of these springs, and you can measure out how much spring height you need for the valves that you're running. You can also get longer valves for these engines, so you don't have to mill out the head as much. But the only problem with a Hemi engine is those pedestals. You can't move the rockers any. Where a non-Hemi, you can shim up the rockers if you need to get more height out of them if you're running a taller valve. So again, that's another downside to a Hemi engine. I wanted to start with a Hemi engine because it seems like more people that's doing this hobby start with the Hemi engine, and then you'll see us in the next videos moving on to the non-Hemi head on this Hemi block. And again, I'm no professional engine builder. I'm showing you guys, we're learning as we go, and that's the whole point of this Road to Horsepower. I'm not some like professional mechanic doing this. I'm doing it just like you guys would be learning it. I'm just trying to show you guys the things that I find as I'm doing this hobby. And I would love if a company would make, if anybody out there has the capabilities or knows a company that can make a spring, a height checker for these small engines, that would be amazing, because they're starting to bring a lot of tools to market for these small engines that makes my life and engine builders' life easier on these small engines. And I think this is one tool that would help out. But again, so we milled out the spring pocket 100 thousandths on the intake side and 140 on the exhaust side, and it seems to clear fine. It seems like our spring height is pretty decent. Only the dyno will tell how good we did. So let's get the dyno running. We got it all installed. We're going to do a couple runs and see what kind of power we make with 369 lift. That's quite a bit upgrade from what we had before. So let's get on the dyno and see what happens. All right, guys, I don't know if you noticed in that last run we made over 18 horsepower, which is pretty amazing. But if you look at the very end of the dyno pull, right at the very last moment when it started to spit and sputter, the air fuel ratios went super lean. Now, I'm going to about guess that epoxy, I actually did JB weld on the intake side because I didn't want to trust epoxy. I wanted something a little stronger. I think the JB weld gave out where I patched that little hole, because I like to run this dyno at 12 to 12.5 on air fuel ratios. A lot of people would argue with me and say they would rather do it at 14, but in my opinion, from the research I've done, it seems like around 12 to 12.5 is the best for peak horsepower. 14 is best for just drivability and everyday driving, from what I've researched. You can tell me different in the comment section below. But our air fuel ratios went super lean right there at the end. So I'm assuming that what happened was that JB Weld let loose and we're getting air in, because watch the next 2 runs. We made a good, beautiful graph. So we made over 18 horsepower, which is massive gains. I mean, that's over 1.5 horsepower from swapping to this cam. And these cams are only $100. Of course, the valve springs is a little bit more, but still, this is an under $150 upgrade that we did, minus the machine work and the tool that we had to buy to do the milling of the head, to mill out those spring pockets. But we made over 1.5 horsepower. That's huge gains. The second run, you can see here at the end, it basically started smoking a little bit when it let out, and we got a little bit less RPMs. We should get over 8,000 RPMs, but we went so lean there at the end that we couldn't go take the engine any further. So then we ran it a third time, and basically it lost even more horsepower. So we're down to like 16 horsepower by the third run. So I'm assuming that we lost that port plug. So let's pull the carb off real quick and see what exactly happened. Okay, so we pulled the carb off, and sure enough, I don't know if you guys can see this, but our JB Weld came off the intake. If we put our finger in here, bam, oil. So that's why we went lean right there at the end. And we made 18 horsepower before this plug let out. So what I'm gonna do is we're gonna pull this thing off the dyno, and I'm going to TIG weld that that breakthrough. Can you see it now? It's right past the brown looking oil stains. So if we TIG weld this up, I think we're going to see even more than 18 horsepower. Now we also had another failure on our exhaust. The vibrations, sorry, I have oil on my finger. The vibrations of these engines are pretty insane, and we snapped this again. So I have a few ideas on how to fix this problem. Now, unfortunately, we don't have enough time in this video to do another dyno run, but what we'll do is I'll pull that head off, and I'm gonna TIG weld that hole up, and I'm gonna put a little bit of ball of TIG weld in there so it has a little bit extra material. I thought the JB Weld would hold. I've heard people using epoxy on the intake side in car engines and stuff, because back in the day, people used to have this problem with certain heads trying to get their spring height and stuff like that. Hopefully we didn't damage the engine. Like, where did the JB Weld go? You know, it obviously went into the intake or through the valve. And so what we'll do is pull the head off, we'll check it out in the next video, and we'll repair that the proper way. The only reason I didn't go through the extent of TIG welding it, because I knew we was moving on to a non-Hemi head, so I didn't want to put any work into this head right now. But we made over 18 horsepower. That's huge gains, and I'm so pumped about this. But with the exhaust cracking, that's the second time it's cracked, and it's just, for one, it's thinner material, and there's so much vibrations, and since I'm supporting the exhaust, hard supporting it right past where it cracked, I think what I'm going to do is mark the guy who got us our dyno. If you use Clovis, links in the video description for AMSOIL products, you can save up to 25% on AMSOIL products. So massive shout out to Mark for this dyno and allowing us to be able to do this. He had an idea of a motorcycle exhaust. A lot of them use springs to hold the exhaust on, and that's where the header can kind of move. If you think about it, like two strokes, use springs to hold it to the head, and then it's rubber supported on the frame. So the exhaust is kind of, you know, to a point floating a little bit. I think I'm going to do the same thing with this. I'm going to put a bellow on the exhaust so the exhaust can kind of move with the vibrations and not have to worry about it cracking. And then I may make a new flange that has the spring-loaded setup on it like a motorcycle does. So, and then do rubber supports on the muffler instead of everything being hard, because this is the third time that I broke this exhaust on this. So obviously we have a vibration problem, and I'm not going to send every engine off to get balance. I mean, this engine will get balance very soon in the future. Probably when we fix the head, we'll do the dyno and see what it makes after the repair, then send the rotating assembly off. So hope you enjoyed today's video. I know this is a different type of road to horsepower video, and we had that fail, but we was making some real crazy power. I mean, over 1.5 horsepower gains, and we didn't even get to the RPM range we should have got to because of the leak in the intake side. It went lean all of a sudden, started drinking some oil through there. So we're going to get it fixed in the next episode. Let us know what you thought about this episode in the comment section below. Make sure to check out the links for all these parts. Massive shout out to Go Power Sports for sending out the cam and the valve springs, and we'll do another video in the next coming weeks on repairing this and seeing what it really makes. We'll TIG weld it, we'll do it proper, no cutting corners, but a lot of people would have did this same repair, in my opinion, if they ran into this problem. So let us know what we did wrong, what we did right. We're reading your comments, guys. We thank you so much for supporting us. Thank you to all the sponsors that made this series happen, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you guys for watching. We love you. God bless, and get out there and make some horsepower.